You know what's strange? We talk endlessly about boomers and millennials. We dissect Gen Z like there's some kind of fascinating new species. But there's this entire generation that just exists in the middle. The one that's been called the forgotten generation, the middle child of history. But the truth about Generation X isn't really in the big statistics. It's in the silence of an empty house. If you remember the feeling of a house key on a string around your neck, if you basically had to raise yourself between the hours of 3 p.m. and 6 p.m., then you know. You know that being a latchkey kid was more than just being alone. It was a kind of education. It was an education in radical self-reliance, in figuring things out on your own, in a world that wasn't really designed for your comfort or safety. It taught a fierce kind of independence, but it also left these hidden emotional scars. And that, right there, is the unspoken truth about the psychology of Gen X. Here's what you need to understand. Generation X, born roughly between 1965 and 1980, was shaped by a very specific set of circumstances. You had rising divorce rates, a huge surge in dual-income households, and a parenting style that was more about toughness than tenderness. It's what led some sociologists to describe them as one of the least parented, least nurtured generations in recent history. This period of so-called benign neglect wasn't just some quirky thing about the 70s and 80s. It was the main force that shaped the Gen X psyche. The experience of coming home to an empty house, of managing your own schedule, your own fears, your own meals. It created a distinct psychological profile. On one side, you have this celebrated, almost pathological independence. On the other, a quiet, unacknowledged emotional wound. The unspoken truth is that these two sides aren't separate. They're locked together. Their greatest strength was born from their earliest burden, the forging of fierce independence. The first thing you notice, the most obvious effect of this upbringing, is a deep, almost cellular sense of independence. For a latchkey kid, self-reliance wasn't a virtue you learned. It was a survival reflex. There was no one to call for help when the VCR ate your rental tape. No adult to step in when you had a fight with the neighborhood kids. If you were hungry, you learned to get creative with whatever was in the fridge. This wasn't just about learning practical skills. It was deep psychological conditioning. They learned, through direct and often harsh feedback, that problems were their own to solve. The world taught them that if something needed to be done, they were going to have to be the ones to do it. This created an incredible resourcefulness and a deep-seated belief in their own competence. It's a trait that has been widely observed in Gen X, a powerful sense of self-control and an ability to execute tasks without needing a lot of external validation. You see this play out in the Gen X work ethic. In the workplace, they're the quiet problem solvers who don't need to be micromanaged. You can give them a complex task and just trust they'll figure it out, because their entire childhood was basically an apprenticeship in figuring things out. It's why you'll often hear Gen Xers express the belief that their generation has a superior work ethic. They don't necessarily work harder in terms of hours. In fact, after watching their boomer parents burn out, they're famously protective of work-life balance. But they work with a pragmatic, autonomous efficiency. They value competence over credentials and results over rah-rah corporate culture. It's a direct translation of the latchkey kid ethos. Just get it done. This independence wasn't a choice. It was a non-negotiable term of their existence, and it became the bedrock of their character. The third defining trait forged in their childhood is a deep and permanent skepticism. They didn't just grow up with minimal supervision from parents. They grew up with minimal supervision from society's gatekeepers. They were the first generation to see a constant stream of institutional failure broadcast directly into their living rooms without a parental filter. They watched the Challenger space shuttle explode live on television in their classrooms. They saw the shadows of the Cold War, the AIDS epidemic bloom from a whisper to a terrifying roar, and political scandals like Watergate and Iran-Contra destroy trust in authority. They saw their parents, who believed in company loyalty, get laid off during brutal recessions. This steady diet of disillusionment, combined with their built-in self-reliance, created a default setting of skepticism. They learned not to trust institutions, corporations, or authority figures blindly. For Gen X, trust is never just given. It has to be earned, usually through proven competence. They respect the person who can actually fix the problem, not the person with the fancy title. This is why they're often seen as cynical. It's not that they believe in nothing. It's that they believe in what's real, what's tangible, and what works. It's a balanced skepticism that makes them pretty good mediators between more trusting and more cynical generations. In the modern world, this translates into a workforce that is resistant to corporate propaganda. They aren't impressed by buzzwords. They want to know, does it work? Is it fair? Is it real? They're the generation that bridges the analog and digital worlds, comfortable with technology, but not defined by it. It's not cynicism. It's realism. It's the logical worldview of a generation that learned early on that the only person you can truly count on is the one staring back at you in the mirror. And now, here's the fascinating part. As parents themselves, they're caught in this deep, ironic paradox. After being raised as the least parented generation, many swung the pendulum to the absolute opposite extreme. They became the generation of helicopter parents, hyper-involved, always present, and invested in every single detail of their children's lives. They swore their kids would never feel the loneliness of an empty house. They shuttle them from one activity to the next, monitor their grades, and fill their summers with structured plans because they remember the unstructured, sometimes terrifying, boredom of their own. They talk to them about their feelings, validating them in a way they rarely experienced. They learn to speak a language of emotional support their own parents didn't know. But in doing all this, a quiet, nagging question comes up. In giving their children the constant presence and support they craved, have they accidentally robbed them of the very experiences that made them who they are? Have they denied them the gift of figuring it out alone? By protecting them from the neglect that defined their own youth, have they made them less resilient, less independent? This is the Gen X parenting paradox. They overcorrect for the past, only to worry they're creating a whole new set of problems. It's a central struggle for a generation caught between two totally different worlds of childhood. They want to give their kids the safety they didn't have, without taking away the strength it gave them. So, what's the final, unspoken truth of Generation X? It's this: their greatest strength, that fierce independence, is tied directly to their deepest wound. The self-reliance that makes them the resilient backbone of society is the direct result of a childhood defined by absence. They are the quiet problem solvers, the psychological glue holding things together, precisely because they learned to expect no one else to do it. They aren't the loudest generation. They don't demand the spotlight like boomers or seek constant feedback like millennials. They operate on a simple principle. Success that costs you your peace of mind isn't really success at all. This isn't a trend. It's a long-term defense mechanism forged in the fires of watching their parents work themselves to exhaustion for a security that never really came. They're the bridge, the generation that remembers life before the internet but mastered its tools. The generation raised with analog rules that now parents in a digital world. Our psychological profile: independent, competent, skeptical, and emotionally self-contained, is not an accident. It's a finely tuned adaptation. It's the product of silent afternoons and house keys on shoelaces. And while the world might see them as the forgotten generation, the truth is they've never needed the world to remember them. They were too busy quietly holding it all together.